Okay, so as we just started recording, essentially, Purview, fully managed PaaS service on Azure, aimed specifically to enable you to do comprehensive data governance on Azure. The way essentially just a second. Yeah. One of the main features actually that Purview brings to the table is the automated discovery of data sources and data assets. So Purview really, like, it brings, as I said, I've worked on the connector specifically for Azure Data Explorer, but it brings connectors for in its current state for a few services, data services like SQL database or data lake services, or Synapse, as we'll see later on. But it aims to be to connect to everything that you have in your data estate, right? So it's able to connect to those services to kind of keep the information of all the scanned data assets that it detects in those data sources up to date. So if you change anything in your databases, if the schema of a table changes, if you add new tables, if you add new data sources, if you have new Hadoop cluster, if you have a new ADX cluster, these kind of services, once you register them within within Purview, they will be kept up to date automatically, depending on how your Purview administrators essentially configure Purview to do that. I'll show you how this is done in a demo later on. But these data assets essentially will not only be like scanned and then will be searchable through a UI. They will also be classified, and in order to do that, the team has actually used existing, like from Microsoft internally, existing classifiers that they use to kind of pick up those wherever possible, like if they are generic things like social security numbers in the US, or if there's a phone number or email addresses or people like names of people, all these like generic things. There's over 100 pre-built classifications built into Purview as of today in the public preview. And these will be these are assigned automatically. If you enable the feature, then Purview will scan all your data assets, and it'll sample the data within those data assets in order to detect the classification of the specific content within those data assets. So this is essentially the way of you giving more context to give you more context of what's actually in your data stores. And all of this enables you then, as we'll see in the UI and overall in the reports, to kind of more clearly see where is data coming from, where is it stored, how does it flow through my data lakes and how through my data warehouses, for example. But also it aims to be this, I briefly mentioned data democratization as a kind of a buzzword in the introduction. It also aims to be this bridge between business users and technical users. So there's a feature called the business glossary, for example, in Purview, where you can define specific domain domain words, like meaning business domain specific terms, like, I don't know, monthly sales report relevant, and input essentially all those terms that the business users are familiar with into the glossary, and then assign those business terms to specific data sources or data assets or specific columns in those data assets, just so that when the business people access the Purview data catalog through various ways, then they can essentially look for, I don't know, the name of their Power BI dashboard that they are using. They'll find the Power BI dashboard, or they'll find the KPI, the name of the KPI that they need to find data for. They'll find it in the data catalog, and then they can see all the data assets that are connected to that KPI term. They see the people that are responsible for these data sources, so that they actually know whom to reach out to get access to something new or to talk about a potential error, and also see lineage information to kind of see how does data actually flow into my Power BI report, like what data sources are involved, what transformation processes are involved, all of that. Yeah. So, and also like the data insights part of Purview it's more geared towards like the chief data officer type of user that I kind of was referring to in the introduction. But also the data insights part of Purview gives you an overview of like a holistic view of your data lake and your data estate. It shows you all types of data sources, how many like file types, how many classifications, what are the most common classifications of data, how many data sources contain GDPR relevant data, all of these things. It tries to surface through specific data insights, dashboards, and reports. So as the bridge now from the introduction essentially to the little bit more specific part in terms of how Purview is actually built, let me tell you a little bit about the main parts here that Purview is built out of as of the public preview. So the modules, the core module here is the data map, and it's essentially where all the scanners that run automatically and essentially go through all your data estates. They scan all the SQL servers, all the data lakes, the storage accounts, whatever you might have. They store this information in the central data map. And this is essentially the ground truth for all the metadata of the data assets in your data estate. On top of that, of course, there's the use case of the data catalog. So browsing the data map in a meaningful, powerful UI, giving you like a great semantic search experience, is the data catalog module essentially that allows users to efficiently crawl the data map metadata list essentially. And the second part is what I already mentioned, the data insights reports and dashboards part. It also builds on top of this data map and just gives you essentially unique views from specific angles on all of the possible KPIs that you can deduct and infer from your data estate in the data map. It's also important to kind of highlight, I think, that as we'll see in the more detailed view of this here, that the data map, which essentially contains the data, as I said, about all assets, but also data asset metadata is also lineage and classifications. So as I said before, those built-in classifiers when you scan your data estate, the classifications that have been detected, they're also stored in this data map. And also it's not only able to scan Azure native services, it's also much in a similar fashion if you're familiar with Azure Data Factory integration runtime. It's also possible to scan hybrid environments and on-prem environments, so that all of your like on-prem standard SQL Server environments, for example, are also included in your included in your data catalog essentially. And various operational and analytical and SaaS services. There's a lot coming. If you've ever looked at the supported data sources now within Purview, I think it's, I don't know, 9, 10, 12, something around that. But it will be much more down the road. Brief teaser, I think 1.5 weeks is already again, it's our Ignite. There will be announcements around Purview there as well, so it might be worth checking that out to see a little bit of where we are headed in terms of connectivity, native connectivity. You see a few examples on the right. One specific example that stands out is Microsoft 365 Compliance Center. I'll touch upon that briefly at the very end of this session, what this infers, because this is like, in my opinion, has great potential for the future. But one of the core things actually for me is that all of what I'm going to show you today, so everything that you're going to be able to see and do through the Purview UI is fully built upon the open API based on Apache Atlas. So nothing that we actually do as Microsoft, where we built this Purview service, nothing is done outside of those Atlas API operations. So everything that we will do, you'll be able to do through the UI. You will be able to do using the Atlas API that we are fully surfacing using Purview. So you can use this. Just use the open source Apache Atlas API docs, and you can essentially reuse everything that you might have done in this area already, or reuse the connectors of a lot of open source tooling that's around and has Atlas support for quite a while. Atlas has been around for a few years now. So we've already seen quite a few customers actually take advantage and telling, okay, we know that there's a lot of new data sources, supported data sources natively coming to Purview, but we're doing a lot of I don't know, proprietary data translation. There's this like in customers we've seen machine data that they can only make readable essentially and parsable using custom code. So they kind of add 2 or 3 lines of code into these data transformations, which allows them that essentially each time this transformation is run, this information gets pushed to the Atlas API and it'll show up in Purview as a data lineage path for that specific data asset that it is connected to. So we've seen that being used actually quite heavily. But now let's touch briefly into actually what does Purview look like? How is it being handled? How do you work with it? And just what are the specific features that are available today in the UI? First of all, I'm going to show you, I talked a lot about the classification. I talked a lot about the automated scanning. So I'm going to show you a little bit how the data map is surfaced. So the data map in and in itself is essentially a graphical representation that you can essentially group the way you like. So you create these collections that you see here. They can, free text, and then you essentially register data sources that are associated to these collections. So this is a demo that I've built. I essentially I deployed all my data sources in West Europe in this example. I have 2 sub collections for West Europe. There is 2 data explorer clusters that I use for log file analytics. There's a few data sources that I am using for storing raw data from IoT devices. And there's also like my classical SQL area, my SQL data warehouse, a few SQL databases, so the more classical approach to store SQL data. And essentially the way the data map is visualized, you kind of see this logical grouping. And if they are getting really big, you can always like take on these minuses here and then make them smaller, and then extend them again and have like a first overview of a logical grouping of all the data sources that you have in your company. The data map, essentially, the data source pane here that you see, this is the view essentially, and from here you can go into configuring the scans and into configuring the data source credentials. All of that I'm going to show you in the demo after the next few slides, just to see. We're going to add a new collection and then we're going to add a new storage account. I'm going to show you how authentication works, and then how this essentially is being scanned and how the data is then actually discovered and searchable. Searchable is actually a good keyword because we've, of course, want to use this data map as the data source for the data catalog experience. So we want to be able to browse and search our data map for the data assets, right? So just as a demo, like we search for revenue, we kind of see a lot of data sources coming up. It's kind of it already is. It also learns from your search behavior. It tries to suggest specific terms that it already has in the data catalog to make the search experience easier. So it's kind of this semantic search experience that everybody is familiar with using modern discovery tools. It also, of course, as I said, we have the business glossary that we'll touch upon shortly. We have these classifications. We have business contacts, people that are experts or that are owners of specific data assets. These are all like filter criteria or search criteria that you can, of course, then use to drill down further into the search results to kind of identify what you really want to be able to see. This goes actually pretty far. So the search experience, I tried it myself just a few weeks back. We had a use case where a customer was storing metadata tags on blobs. So they were uploading a lot of blob files to the storage accounts. But in order to identify them a little bit more without having to actually read and access the blobs themselves, they added metadata tags to the blobs. And Purview actually picks those up as well. So if you have, I don't know, you have a metadata tag that identifies the originating factory for a specific telemetry data that has been uploaded as a log file to a storage account, you can just essentially look for the factory name here in the search experience, and it'll find that blob in this storage account based on the name of the metadata tag that it has been giving during being uploaded to the storage account. So it's really like it's going into a lot of details as to what is being cataloged in terms of metadata.
Hans-Peter, let me quickly interrupt you because there is an interesting question that I think is fitting in right now.
Okay.
You were talking about the metadata tags, and because this is all compatible, or most of it is compatible with Atlas, is the metadata tag equivalent to the Atlas label? Do you know about that?
I'd have to check where it is actually stored. It's I just saw we can have a look actually later where it is because I think I still have it in my demo environment where I tested it. It just showed up essentially as some sort of generic attribute, but I don't exactly know the Atlas name of the attribute it was stored in. Excellent. But I can try when we have discussion later. Maybe I can try and find it, and then we can see where it is being stored.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, so once you click on a specific data asset, you get into the data asset detail view. This is just an example because it's it's perfect in terms of how many specific attributes it has attached to it. This is an Azure SQL Synapse analytics table. So data warehouse, SQL data warehouse table. The overview pane essentially gives you can add a description, and you also already see here the semantic metadata of the classifications that have been picked up. So some of them might be, some of them are pre-built, right? Some of them are pre-built like person's name or email address. They might be specifically important because they are PII relevant, which might give the table a specific flag. We already see here this flag, and it's here. This is actually a label, the confidential label of the table itself. And why? Because it contains PII relevant data. But also what we see here, and I'll show you how that works in the demo as well, is we see tags like customer ID, invoice number, product code, and cost center code. Now you might wonder, okay, how does Microsoft know what is a product code and what is a cost center code? And the real simple answer is we don't. But you know that because that is classical domain knowledge. And what you're actually able to do is you're easily able to extend the pre-built classifications using custom classifications and classification rules that you define yourself. For now, in the public preview, these are purely regex based, so there's no kind of magic behind that as of now. But you can define custom classification rules. For example, how we did that in the POC with the customer. They have they produce specific devices, and we essentially the specific device families are identifiable through specific regex patterns of the product item numbers, right? So essentially what we did, we kind of built a classification for their three main business item families, device families, and then essentially what Purview did was it flagged all the data sources that contain data about a specific device family. Now this might not be a classical use case. More classical use cases here. There's data about invoices in this table. There's data about cost centers in this table. All of that has been essentially picked up by custom classification rules that have been defined in the management center of Purview. Then we have the operational metadata. So when was it created? When was it last modified? This, of course, depends a little. So how up to date this information is depends a little bit on how often you run the scans. So last modified, for example, is if you run this scan on the data source once a month, the modified time information might be mostly useless on all of the tables. But if you do it like once a day or even like update delta scans more frequently, then this might be an information that's actually valuable as well. And on the bottom right, to close the gap again to the business glossary that we mentioned a few times already, we see that this is somehow related to the term worldwide sales, whatever it might be. The definition is in the business glossary. Business users will know what that means. And if they go ahead and search not for revenue at the top, but they search for worldwide sales, then this ref by customer Synapse Analytics SQL table, which might not mean anything to the business user will show up, and they will know through the information that is attached to it whom to ask and whom to reach out for, or which data source is affected. But all of this, like we'll click through exactly that UI in the demo a little bit later on. We see the schema information of the table, classical column names, data types. Also the classification, they are of course attached on a per column level, right? So they're grouped in the table view, but they're assigned on a per column level. You see also person's name. We have first name and last name is of course then attributed twice, and glossary terms are attached, can be attached on column level, and also like the specific descriptions can be added per column. And a very important feature and very interesting for a lot of customers is the lineage. I just skipped to a different data asset essentially to make it a little bit more interesting, and I'll show you quite a few things that it can do in terms of column level lineage in the demo later. But here you see also Power BI is a supported data source. And here you see we have a Power BI dashboard that accesses data from specific Power BI data sets. These data sets are being fed by Azure Synapse tables, and the Synapse tables are being fed through two ETL data factory copy jobs or data transformation data flows. And they're coming from specific upstream data sources, right? So essentially, if somebody looks at his Power BI dashboard because he sees, okay, it's broken, it's not working. Why is it not working? There's no coupon data in my Power BI dashboard, and then he'll probably know, okay, there's the coupon store. Something must have broken somewhere along that path. And then you can look into the data factory job here, or you can look at the data set of Power BI here. There's just a few hints and places where people can look and reach out to the contacts, for example, of whoever is listed as an expert or as the owner of the coupon store data source, right? And also here, this is currently one of the most commonly used or one of the most common use cases for the Atlas API usage, because as I'll show you in a minute, the way this is being extracted automatically, there's of course specific requirements for Purview to pick this up in that fashion automatically, right? It looks all nice and well in the demo here, but there's a few requirements so that Purview is actually able to do that. So a lot of, in the example that I used before with custom transformations of proprietary data, this also, it doesn't necessarily have to be an ADF job here. It can also be a Python script, for example, or a .NET script that does some sort of translation from proprietary data format into CSV, right? So we've seen that being used a lot to kind of make these lineage views a little bit more detailed. And the last information here, as I said, very important, subject matter experts attached to the data asset, in this case to the table, and who's the owner of, who's responsible for everything regarding that data asset. Okay, next topic here, the business glossary. The business glossary itself looks something like this. So, I mean, in general, it's pretty straightforward, right? It's just a list of terms with descriptions. You see here there is a status process around it. You can have specific people involved in the process of telling, okay, this is actually what we mean by that business glossary term, right? So everybody approves, and then once it's approved, it can be assigned to specific data assets. But essentially, what it is you define domain-specific glossary terms. They have a description attached to them, a definition. Also important, they can have acronyms. So if people search for specific acronyms of it, they will be routed to this market development and sales, in this case, for example, so that everybody, even if specific teams use different names to kind of that kind of mean the same things, they will all be pointed to the same glossary term and will all talk about the same data sources that are attached to it. And you actually, if you click on one of those glossary terms, this is the definition of this market development and sales. You'll actually see how many assets are attached to that glossary term, right? And this is kind of another angle. You can come from, if you come from the data asset like we did before, you'll see all the business glossary terms that are attached to a specific data asset like a SQL table. Or you can come from more of the business side of things, and then you look, okay, I'm looking for information on my market development and sales, which is in this case is a business unit, and then I see, okay, how many data assets are actually important for this specific business unit in that case, right? And then you see, in this case, it's only one, but then you see, okay, all like 30 or whatever data assets in the data catalog that are important for my business unit, and then I'll have a much narrower list of data assets that I have to look for when I'm looking for specific information or new data sources or errors or whatever it might be. Yeah, let's get really important. Purview Insights, almost done with the slides, I promise. Purview Insights, so as I said, another angle to look at this is from this Chief Data Officer perspective. So the data map itself, of course, if you do analytics on the data map, so to say, you get a lot of insights. There's a few specific views that you can have on your on the data in your data map. So you see kind of how many assets are in each source type. So we'll see here, I don't know, it looks like a data lake scenario. So most of the data assets are stored in an Azure Data Catalog, Azure Data Lake Store Gen 2 type of data store, but also Synapse, SQL Server, SQL Database, Cosmos DB, all of it essentially. We see kind of when the number of sources that have been counted over time essentially, and also what were the most used or the most discovered classifications in my data sources. In this case, we see it's an email address, and I think this is from our internal Contoso kind of demo tenant that I'll also use later, which is a sales company. So it might make sense that we have a lot of email addresses and geolocations and credit card numbers and invoice numbers. Yeah. And the last thing I want to kind of give you a little bit of an overview on the slide form is the management center, the pillar that essentially the administrators use to connect and to set up all the connections to the data sources, so that Purview is actually able to automatically renew every information and catalog it in the first place. I'll go through the details again later on. There's a few there's a few settings that you can define here among next to just the data sources. Importantly, I wanted to briefly mention it here though, is the RBAC concept. So we do see that the Purview data catalog and Purview experience offers specific user roles on an Azure RBAC level, and the specific users. I mean, for now, it's not as fine-grained, so it will be more fine-grained in the future. But there's user roles for, I don't know, people that just manage data sources, for example, for people that are able to edit information on data assets, for people that are only able to browse the catalog but not edit anything. So essentially, I wanted to just, without going too much into detail, show you that there is a user group concept behind that already, which will be more fine-grained in the future going forward. And also, just as a last slide, you see here an example of those classification rules that I mentioned. We had those invoice ID classification added, where I mentioned that it has to be a custom one because we cannot really detect the kind of type of numbers you use for invoices. So you can say, okay, the data pattern is like this. It needs to meet certain match criteria for it to kind of fire, for it to be attached to the specific data asset, and then you can assign it to a custom to custom scans. You can tell the scan to use your custom classification rule, and then it'll be picked up and also be stored in the data map. Okay, that will be like my wall of slides. I would go to demo, and now I would like try to answer a few questions.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a question from Stefan, and since I missed the context, Stefan, can you speak up? I don't know.
Yeah,
are you able to speak? Yeah.
I just raised hand because the classification topic is something I wondered. Is it possible to import already classified labels, assignments from SQL or Security Center of Azure? Or This seems to be a separate party again.
I'll touch on that. I'll touch on that. Security center is a good topic. Actually, in my like next slide preview, I already see this topic being being touched. I would go through the demo a little bit on the UI side, but I will touch on the topic on how on where this is headed and how it integrates with Microsoft 365. And for example, you mentioned Security Center. I would touch on that in a few minutes.
And the first question had been on the overview of the data sources. Yeah. Is it just the number of objects, tables, whatever is in each bucket, or is it also counting volume of data? So you see the big buckets.
You mean on the data insights pane? Yeah, there's different views on that. I just showed one dashboard, right? So there's like six of them pre-built. Data volume, I think, is one of them. We can try and look it up in the data insights now during the demo. This was just one angle, right? So there's a few of them, and actually going forward, you will be able to create reports and custom dashboards out of this as well.
Fine. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, then let me just go to my hopefully still fully, yeah. So this is like all prepped demo environment with my 10 demo tabs. So essentially like Purview, just real quick, of course, Purview is being deployed as an Azure service like any other. So you go to Purview accounts, you add a Purview account. So don't worry, I'm not going to wait for it. I'm just going to show you a little bit on what the basics are. You essentially put it in a resource group. You enter a name. Tell it, give it a location, and then and I mean I mentioned it briefly before. I saw the discussion around pricing already. So for now, and this is essentially during public preview, which since the introduction of Purview on December 3rd, Purview is still in, so it's still public preview. GA will happen, but for now it's still in public preview. And one of the limitations in public preview is actually that you can only choose between 4 and 16 capacity units when they're deployed. The capacity units kind of give you a little bit of an, it gives you more power. For example, if your data lake is like petabytes in size, you need more capacity units. If your data lake is smaller in size, or you're fine with like the scans taking a little bit longer, you need less capacity units, right? So that let's not go deeper than that. It's just for the sake of the demos and for the sake of the POCs that we did, for most use cases in the evaluation or POC phase, just go with 4. In terms of pricing, 4 are free, quote unquote. Depends a little bit on the type of your subscriptions. We'll see that on the pricing page in a second. But essentially go for 4 now if you want to try and test it out a little bit. For now, there will be different business SKUs that influence pricing, so you can kind of add or remove features that you want to have in Purview, which kind of give you a little bit of flexibility in terms of the pricing tiers that you want to choose and the capabilities that you maybe don't need. But for again in the preview, everything is selected by default because these features are like free in the preview anyway, and that's it essentially. And they say review and create, and your Purview account gets created. Like maybe real quick, the pricing, I mentioned it. You see the remarks that I saw on LinkedIn, and that's actually only why I'm touching it here, just to give you a little bit of a context. It gives you 4 free capacity units during the preview, and it'll give you 16 vCore hours of scanning. So these are the 2 pricing dimensions, right? So capacity units are being built, and the vCore hours that you use for scanning are charged after a specific free amount of free vCore hours. But these free units are only available for customers on specific like the pay-as-you-go, which if you're in an enterprise environment, you might not have this. So you need to check if you are under one of those subscription types or plans, because otherwise it might be that you have some sort of not really great surprise in the end of the month. So just keep an eye on that. I just mentioned it. I mean, typically not talking about pricing in a demo, but I just wanted to mention it since I saw the discussions on the LinkedIn post up front. In any case, if you deployed Purview, you will end up with a Purview Pass service. in Azure, there's not much here actually, other than just to open Purview Studio. And if you click on Open Purview Studio, you will be here. And I mentioned this is like the landing page. I'll show you the search in a second. But the core where we also started the discussion in the slides was the data map, right? And you see this is also the sample that I used in my slides. And let's say I kind of, I can kind of be flexible and just look at look at West Europe, add North Europe, whatever, right? So let's say I want to add a new collection because I want to kind of I have a collection where I store machine test data collection, and the parent collection here is just West Europe. So right, it's also in West Europe. For now, this doesn't really do much. It just creates this kind of empty container where it can create specific data sources. So what I can do now is I can register sources. These are the supported sources in my preview environment. For the sake of the demo, I'm just going to add a blob storage account to not make it too complicated. I'm going to give it a name, Azure blob test account. The subscription, I have access to quite a few subscriptions, so let's just choose this one, mine. The storage account should be my test storage account. It automatically pulls the endpoint, attaches it to this machine data test collection, and I say register. And it worked. And why did it work? Because nothing happened yet. So essentially, we just attached logically this blob storage account to this collection, but no connection to the storage account has been established yet, right? So we selected it, and it seems to exist because we kind of selected it from the drop-down list in the subscriptions that I have access to, but that doesn't really say much, right? I mean, I have access to a lot of subscriptions, but I don't have write access or read access to all the resources within those subscriptions per se. So in order to kind of be able to read this asset in the data map and to give it more context to actually scan what is in that data asset, we're going to set up a scan. This scan, this is then the first step where we actually need to define how Purview authenticates itself against the data sources, right? And this needs to be set up once, right? So Purview does not, through any magic, because I've seen that kind of thinking happen sometimes when I talk to pitched Purview to customers, where they said, why does it not pick up everything that I have in my EA, right? In all my subscription in all the company. First of all, we can't do that because we have no access to it. And second of all, it would probably not worth it to map every single storage account, every single database that exists anywhere in the corners of your company in a data catalog. You might want to have control of what's actually in your data catalog, right? So this is the reason why you have, or the data source administrators, to talking the RBAC role terms, they have to define the connectivity and what's actually included in the data map once upfront for the data source to be included, right? There's a few ways to connect to the blob storage account. I'm going to show you how to do it using the managed identity. If you deploy Purview itself gets the managed service identity, MSI, attached to it. There's a few other ways to do it. It'll give you the details here on the managed identity name that we're using for the sake of this demo. And what I'm doing now is I'm going to my storage account, right? It's this one. I'm going to the access control pane. So using Azure RBAC, I go to role assignments. There's a few existing role assignments here of a lot of things that are already there. I click on add. I say add role assignment. I select the role. Now from the docs, I do know that Purview asks if you connect Purview to a storage account, it needs to be storage blob data reader, right? It needs to be able to sample the data, not only list the storage account content, but also read the files that are in there, because otherwise classification would not work. So it needs to be storage blob data reader. I look for my MSI that has been created in Purview, and I click save, and then essentially the role assignment will show up here, right? So this is my Purview MSI. It now has this storage blob data reader access to my storage account. Then I can go back and I click on test connection now and hope that it replicated fast enough for the demo. Otherwise, otherwise you would have just have to believe me that it works. And then it already lists, like, I have one container with 4 folders in there. You can specifically say, okay, I want to scan specific files, or I want to exclude specific files, whatever, right? So you can define that here. I can say continue. Then I have only one rule set. I can define specific rule set. I don't know, one rule set only apply the generic built-in classifications, one rules that only apply the custom classifications because I want to apply them every day, and the generic ones only once a month, right? So there's a lot of fine-grained control that you can have on what's actually happening in the individual scans. I define a scan trigger. This is pretty similar, like you would define a trigger of a pipeline in Azure Data Factory. For now, I'm going to say only once. I'm going to click on continue, save, and run. And this is essentially it right now. So in the background, it'll fire up. It use those vCore hours that we have. Some of them are are included. Some of them are then, if you scan a lot, you have to pay extra per vCore hour. But now it uses these compute instances in the background and crawls through my storage account to find the content. And then after I show you like the next few things here, we can kind of try and look up the things here in the search assets experience. Okay. But for the sake of the demo, let's say we kind of were looking for product information, right? And the product information, while my scan is cataloging my storage account, let's say we want to find out a little bit more about product information, and then we see, okay, we know that the information about the products that I want to look at are in an Azure SQL database. So I click the Azure SQL database here, and I kind of get a list of all search results that kind of qualify here. But I want to know, okay, this seems like a promising candidate. It's called product, so this might actually be something that is worthwhile. I can look at it. So this is already what I showed you. We see here it's a SQL table. This is the schema that's attached to it. This is the database it's running on, and this is the logical Azure SQL server that it is running on. So we can click here and actually jump. These are all assets. These are all data assets. These are all objects that can have other information attached to it. We can already see here if I have access, which in this case I seem to have. So this is our internal Contoso demo environment. I can actually click here and open it in Power BI Desktop. Of course, then the access rules of the underlying data source will come into play, and I'll either be able to read it or not, or read only parts of it, whatever. But I can open this connection string is essentially already in Power BI Desktop and start exploring. There's specific schema information attached to it. Again, nothing really out of the ordinary here, like you would expect. The lineage information, pretty straightforward. It's just a SQL table that runs through a data factory copy job and then writes data into a storage account, a Gen2 account. Context, there's one colleague here that has been defined as the owner. And then here, maybe also interesting, just to see a little bit more around the context of the data source. We see the schema, right? So there seem to be, in this sales LT schema, we have related assets. So these are like tables that are logically also attached to that schema, and I can look into the database and then see, okay, there's 2 schemas in there. There's this DBO schema, and I can essentially say, okay, there's 2 tables in there, etc., etc., etc. So there's a lot of ways you can, kind of make your way through in every direction that might be interesting in terms of what's connected logically to this specific data asset. But to give you a little bit more on a context in terms of a nice lineage example, I wanted to show you here the customer SQL table. So we see, again, customer pre-built classification. All of them PII have been found on this specific asset. Also 7 glossary terms. So this seems to be a pretty important table. Of course, makes sense. It's the customer table. The lineage information, and you see here Now it's getting a little bit more complex. And I've seen lineage graphs that really like cannot fit on my screen, and this might actually be a little bit small. Let me just, it's a little bit bigger. So we see the customer table, and naturally customer table, is being tapped into quite often. In this case, it's 3 Data Factory copy jobs that are tapping into it. Again, here I can click on the asset. I can switch to the asset in Purview. I can open it directly in Data Factory. If I have access to it, I can directly look into the Data Factory copy job that one, to kind of look up what's happening here. And I can see, okay, data is being read here and being processed downstream, and it ends up somewhere. Then there's other assets hidden here. But what's actually, I think, pretty interesting here is you can also leverage and look at it if you, for example, I click on specific columns of that customer table, right? So I click on customer ID and email address, and I'll actually see here how these propagate through the lineage graph, right? So I see customer ID. Okay, customer ID is in pretty much every data asset that we see here on screen right now. But email address, we can already see, okay, email address is not being propagated down to, for example, this blob path, right? So it seems to be omitted here somewhere along the way, because here it still exists. And also, for example, modified data, I think, was one of the examples, is being omitted down here, right? So it's here, here, and here. And for example, if I want to say, okay, these are actually the 3 items that I'm really interested in. I only want to see the objects that have all of those columns that I selected. I click this button, and then it'll actually highlight, okay, here only this customer backup, which kind of makes sense because it's a backup of the original table, apparently, at least according to name. Only this specific data asset has all my selected columns propagated to it, right? Along the path here, for the other 2 paths, at least one of those columns has been lost along the way, or has been omitted along the way. And I also mentioned the oh no, actually this one I wanted to show first. I also mentioned Power BI supported as a data asset data source, right? As a Azure Purview data source. Which kind of gives you a lot of interesting options, right? It's for us Microsoft internally, just the way our Azure Active Directory is being set up and our Power BI tenants are set up. It's a little bit tough to build a comprehensive demo in the public preview state as of now, due to specific limitations of the Power BI connector. But in any case, you see here we have specific Power BI data sets that might have been defined. We have specific Power BI workspaces. We have Power BI dashboards, and if we click on the Power BI dashboards, also Lineage is supported. I mean, in this case, yeah, straightforward again, but at least, for example, here you see there's this Power BI dashboard, and it's based on this Power BI data set, right? And I can then switch to this data set and look at the overview of that data set, right? So, and we see, okay, the data set has these dashboards that we just came from. So we went from here to here, and then we see, this data set is being used in another Power BI report. Yeah. So if something breaks here, chances are both of those objects will be broken too.
Hans-Peter, there's another question that seems to be fitting here. It's about renaming columns. About the lineage view, you saw some columns being propagated downstream. What about renaming them? What happens when you rename a column, like select email address as mail? Will it still be highlighted?
Yeah, it will, as long as it is done using one of the supported ways that currently propagates Lineage to Purview, right? Good questions, because I didn't mention that, and that's actually a valid point. I mentioned it briefly on the slide before. There are specific requirements for Purview to create one of those beautiful lineage graphs, right? Because if it does that for every data asset and every data transformation in your data estate, in your data lake, and in your SQL environments, then you're actually then there's a lot of benefit already. But of course, as always, when you have like a demo like this, the truth is not that easy. And there is a caveat here. For now, and I'm strictly talking about the current state of the public preview of Purview as of 18th of February. For now, Lineage and automated lineage graph population is only supported if you use Azure Data Factory. So if you use Azure Data Factory for any operation in any feature in Data Factory, be it copy jobs, be it mapping data flows, or be it like the data wrangling data flows, as long as the data transformation is being done in Azure Data Factory, or I mean downstream in Power BI with the ways between the Power BI data sets and everything, the data factories themselves, I'll show you that when we come to the management center, they are linked to a Purview instance, and they will propagate this information, what's being, what happens in their pipelines to Purview as of now. I also want to highlight though that this strictly is a limitation of the current state of Purview, and the team, without being able to tell you much about the details, but the team is very hard at work to extend this in a lot of. You might think about a lot of scenarios where it might make sense to automatically push Lineage to Purview as well from other points in Azure. And most probably whatever you're thinking about, the team is working on right now. So this will be extended to Azure and beyond. That's essentially what I can say.
Might I add a little time warning? Is it okay for you?
Almost done, yeah.
Going for another 13 minutes for demo? Okay,
yeah.
Good.
Oh, that's fine. I won't even need that much. I think 5 minutes and we're done. Good. Okay, just I wanted to highlight another thing that you might stumble upon, because I've heard this from one of the first things that I heard when I talked to customers when they deployed Purview and started their proof of concept was so we scanned our data asset, our data lake, and it came up with this weird object type, which is called a blob resource set. So what is a resource set, right? A lot of times when you work in data lake scenarios, you might be familiar with data partitioning. The data partitioning is actually very important if you work with, big data in terms of HDFS or Azure Data Lakes or blob storage. And a lot of times when you kind of look into these data lake services and structures, a lot of the data in there is actually partitioned. So if I look into machine data so machine data telemetry, which kind of might be in the millions of files per day or messages per day, if I store that for years and it's kind of in the millions and millions and millions of files, it might not be really useful if I have, for example, if I search for, in this case, fixed asset in the search bar, I get like 1 million results, right? Because there's 1 million files that have the name fixed asset in them. Doesn't make sense. As soon as Purview detects what it thinks might be partitioning in a data lake service, like blob storage, it doesn't list the individual blobs. It groups them together into what is called a blob resource set, right? And if you look into the sample URI here that it provides, we kind of see the definition that it picked up, the qualified name for the resource set. You see kind of these year, month, day, and then contoso fix, which is kind of a fixed string again, and then contoso fixed asset, and then underscore and some sort of counting number value. And one of the sample URIs would be, year, month, day. Makes sense. Contoso fixed asset 23. So in this case, it says, okay, you seem to have a resource set, because a resource set then stands for a logical grouping for I don't know, machine data of these fixed asset group of things, whatever it might be. And it seems to be from here on out, so from here on downwards, looking logically at the hierarchy of the data in there, it seems to be a resource set, a data lake part that seems to be partitioned by year, month, day, and then just storing all the files for that specific day in an increasing number format, attaching increasing numbers for it per day. So this kind of, if you stumble upon it, resource sets kind of just aggregate these potentially very large data lake structures a little bit. This has specific upsides and downsides. The downside being a customer pinged me and said, I'm attaching metadata tags. We talked about those already today. I'm attaching metadata tags to all my blobs in this resource set. What happens to them? And the answer for now is they're being omitted. They're not being picked up. And the reason for that is we're not reading 1 million files. As soon as this is being detected, Purview samples a handful. I don't know. specific number of those files within the resource set, again for schema, classification, etc., but really randomly, right? And it would pick up random tags of those specific incidental files that it chose for sampling. So for now, these are being omitted, and for now you can also not influence what is being identified as a resource set and what is not. So that's automated and abstracted away from you for now, and maybe that will change down the road because it might make sense in specific scenarios. Okay, I think, okay, at least for the demo part, let me just go to the management center for 2 minutes. So this is essentially where you set up all the specific information in administering Purview. So I told you, let's go to my Purview account. I know what happened there. And it's not as big. So there are specific scan rule sets, right? I set up, when I set up the connection, I identified one scan rule set per data source, but you can have multiple. Every scan rule set can have specific classifications attached to it that it should look for. It can be an incremental scan or a full scan. So do the full scan at the first of every month, do the incremental scan every day. Things like this can be managed here in specific scan rule sets. You can manage integration runtimes. I don't have any. You can manage the classifications. These are the pre-built ones. You can also look at the custom ones. I don't have any custom classifications, but if we, for example, go to the internal demo environment, we do have a lot of custom classifications that people internally used for demo and testing purposes, and those classifications, so here you define the classification, and under the classification rule, you essentially tell Purview when to apply this classification. And this is where it comes in, like the one you saw before, data pattern, column pattern, matching percentage, threshold, when was it last applied, is it enabled, disabled, etc., etc. And then data factory. So I mentioned if you want to have lineage information, you gotta connect your Purview and data factory together. And here you tell all the data factories, okay, please, dear data factory, push your lineage information to me. And then data factory, each time a pipeline is triggered, the most up-to-date version of that pipeline lineage graph will be forwarded to Purview. And I think that's about it, to be honest. If you go to, maybe let's just real quick touch on it because there was a question about it. This is the asset insight pane, right? So this is all about asset count per source type, file based. Like here you have size trend of file type within source types. So there's a lot. You can click on view more. You can kind of define a little bit of what you want to see and do filtering and do kind of a little bit of a custom aggregation on top of the specific dimensions that this Azure Monitor-like experience gives you. So there's a lot of customization that you can kind of apply here. It's not as extensive now as it probably will be a few months down the road, but this is essentially where all of this chief data officer compliance type of analytics will take place, and this is kind of what it should be. Final two or three slides. Then I'm done with my whole story. Let me just share again. So I added a bonus in case I don't make it that far.
Hans-Peter, here is a
question.
Yeah, that's here's your timekeeper again, and this reminds me.
Okay, we can totally stop here actually and find. I prepared a little bit more in case I'm too fast. Talking too fast.
I would vote for
the main part is over.
I would vote for having a little Q&A session, and there's another question, and this reminds me the good old times when Markus and I have been on the stage. They have to shoot us from them.
Yeah, same here. See,
I think you have the same genes. So maybe we should open for, let's say, a bit of discussion right now, and then have a short break before Andre has to do a session. So there's something from Dennis Gerbert. Dennis, would you like to speak directly to Hans-Peter? Open your mic and
go ahead.
So his question is, what about SSIS in ADF? Is it
Is planned.
okay?
And also on premise or just in running in Azure?
No, it's actually, it doesn't really matter because you can connect on-prem SQL Server like you can connect any SQL environment to it. So for that specific use case, it will not matter if it's running in an on-prem environment or not. You will need an integration runtime to connect to the SQL Server on-prem and to actually map it within Purview. Yeah, this is something that the team is working on.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, questions to Hans-Peter?
Yep, another question. The business content or the business area is currently not built in, so I can't select any data that's linked to production or sales and distribution or the finance or controlling department, because that seems to be just technical sources, technical stuff. Will this come later with the security also?
So security aspects pretty much are missing entirely as of now, right? So there's not really anything in terms of that's showing you what like, I don't know what are open storage accounts or whatever, right? So there's the security aspect as of the public preview is not present in terms of features yet. The thing is, if I wanna like group it logically in terms of what's finance department, what's
into the business domains that should drive the governance.
Yeah. So for now, you can, how you can address that using either custom classifications. You can do that either using assigning specific glossary terms that if you look specific for a specific glossary term called, I don't know, finance department, you will see all finance relevant data sources. I can't think of any other way to do
the
that
tagging
right
of specific sources that this feed is.
Yeah, you can tag and you can add specific custom attributes manually, and also specific. It's a little bit limited now in the preview what you can edit manually, but you can pretty much edit. You can add classifications manually. You know, to outside of those that have been picked up. You can add classifications manually to tables or to columns. You can add descriptions. These descriptions are also searchable. You can add contexts. So yeah, there's a lot of like spots where you can add metadata attributes that will be searchable and discoverable through the data catalog. I think the logical grouping into business units, for example, can be done on multiple ways. There's no ground truth. I think what's better here as of now. But I think using custom attributes or using glossary or using custom classifications, you could achieve it, at least you could achieve the desired outcome one way or another.
From my point of view, that's a big missing point in this tool, because if you position that as a data governance tool, then you need to connect the business with the information and get them into the game, have the teams that know the content from the business perspective, adding information. This seems to be currently just the technical engineering view.
Yeah, from the business side, from the business side for now, essentially only the glossary side is present. The glossary feature will also be extended. I think one of the features actually will be introduced at Ignite. So yes, you're right. I mean, the team actually, and the feedback that they get a lot is that that Purview is by far not feature complete. You know, especially if you look at competing like players in the market. But you know, with this approach to kind of start early and then keep developing, and essentially have this agile approach in adding new features along the way. This is what the team opted to do, and that's why they started in public preview using the features that we see now. The product will look very different once it goes GA, and especially also at the end of the year. Yeah. But this is it for now. I completely agree. There's quite a few angles of the product that are not as extensive as they could be.
Hans-Peter, here's another question from Andre, who's not just speaking in a few minutes, but also listening apparently. And he's asking if you want to get to on-premise integration services data, not just data, but metadata. But if you want to get there, can you reuse the ADF integration runtime that you will already have? Or do you have to set up something else, like a metadata catalog driver, whatever?
That's actually a good question. I cannot really tell you if you can reuse it. That's a good question. I never tried that. I don't know.
Yeah, because you don't have to do a setup in a large company.
Yeah, of course, makes sense.
It's so painful. Yeah.
And now that you talk about the next speaker, I actually didn't show the Synapse integration because it's already available in preview, where you can use Purview within the Synapse workspace. I'm sorry.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Maybe I could ask about the pricing again. That's really a pain in the at the moment because it's quite expensive. When I think the preview pricing, the no fee pricing ends on end of February. Yeah, and the original preview pricing listed in the calculator is not that cheap. It starts with
it's $1,000 a month.
Yeah. So how will that be in the GA product later? Is it a more fine grain adjustment? Can I, for example, pause the scanning in specific periods, and then I can scale down the compute necessary for that? How is the flexibility later in the production environment? Any indications on that?
So yeah, I mentioned briefly the 4 and 16 capacity units. Of course, the limitation to choose one of those two will be lifted once the product reaches GA. So there will be more options, also like less and more, right? So you have that that leverage essentially to influence the pricing a little bit. You can also deploy smaller units. Also, the team is aware of the feedback that scaling might be useful. So they're looking into that as well. Just in general, like the vCore hours, of course, they depend on how many times you run scans and how long those scans are and how extensive and how much, how many of them are like full scans, how many are incremental scans. But yeah, the main part for now, like the $1,000 that you typically come up in the calculator, are these 4 capacity units times 29 cents per hour, which boils down to just over 860 euros per month, which is $1,000. This will definitely be not the entry level for once the product hits GA. Yeah, it'll definitely be less than that.
Okay.
So any more questions from anybody? This is your chance here. Let's open this. Okay. If not,
sounds good.
If not, there's a function built into Teams. It's not only about, let's say, raising hands, or to have applause here. Try it, please. If you find it. So give Hans-Peter some kind of a bit of applause here. But I think he did a very good job here. It was very intense from my point of view. Thank you, Hans-Peter.
Thanks. Yeah, I hope it was something for everyone. I tried to go, I tried to not be too shallow, but also not too deep. So I kind of tried to strike a balance between those two. So I hope it was amazing. It was interesting.
Yeah, it's always hard to do, and I think I did a good job. So starting with the introduction and then going deeper, and so you never know who is in the call here. And excellent talk, I would say. Thank you very much. Great. I'm only asking myself how to keep on. Yeah, or you can just be vocative. It's okay. Open your mics. So maybe we can take questions on LinkedIn if there are any, or just use, I don't know, I haven't made up my mind on this topic. Maybe we can share some information on how we want to do this in the future. But for now, Hans-Peter, thank you very much.
Yeah, I know. You're welcome. Thanks for having me. And if there are any questions, feel free to ping me directly, either on Teams, on LinkedIn, wherever. I'm happy to jump on a call and discuss a few things in a more targeted way.